Good afternoon and a warm welcome to all of our esteemed guests joining us for Diversity MBA's Enlightening Smart Leadership webinar series. I'm Larissa Williams, Vice President for the Center of Excellence at Diversity MBA, and it's truly a joy to see you here with us today. Whether you're joining or returning or joining us for the first time, brace yourselves because today promises to be nothing short of extraordinary. And we're so excited about today's topic. We're always overjoyed that you've chosen to invest your time with us going into our monthly webinar series dedicated to nurturing your professional growth and development. And what better way to kick off this journey with us? Today, we are going to have one of our most provocative topics to date. We're going to be talking about the topic of pay transparency. And so hold tight, get your questions ready, because we do have an expert with us today that I will introduce to you. But before we dive in, a few housekeeping notes. Yes, we are hitting record on today's session, as you heard, ensuring that the wealth of knowledge shared will become available to everyone, including our member corporate partners immediately following the session. So as soon as the session is over, our member corporate partners will have access to today's content. So today's conversation isn't just a passive experience. We want your voices to be heard. Our session today will be brimming with interactivity, so offering you ample opportunities for you to engage and pose your burning questions on this topic. So you will see a Q&A portion that's at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to pop in your question and we will address your question accordingly. And I also want you to make certain that you please mark your calendars for the next webinar, which is scheduled for June 27th, with our very own Pam McElvain. She will be presenting on the topic about engaging your most influential champions. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Her name is also Pam, or Pamela Coukos, is the CEO and co-founder of Working Ideal. Pam is a nationally recognized expert on equity analytics, applying research and experience to build more equitable and inclusive workplaces and business processes. She uses quantitative and qualitative methodologies to understand and identify barriers and to develop metrics to assess progress. She has assessed racial and gender equity at scores of large and small companies, local governments, and nonprofit education and labor organizations. Some of her recent notable projects include leading interdisciplinary teams in their work on the Black Rock Racial Equity Assessment and supporting the Human Rights Campaign and the Black Orchestral Network in strategic planning for social impact. She also developed Working Ideal's unique methodology for assessing gender and racial pay equity and designing pay policies, job architecture frameworks, and career path initiatives, advising a number of leading national civil rights nonprofit organizations who have successfully implemented her tools. She is also the former civil rights attorney and served as a senior advisor at the U.S. Department of Labor. So, like I said, we are so very pleased and excited to have Pam with us today. So, without further ado, it is absolutely my absolute pleasure to pass the baton over to Pam. Okay, Pam, take it over.
Thanks so much, Larissa. And I want to thank you and Pam McElvain and the whole Diversity MBA team for inviting me here today and for being such fantastic partners in all this work. Provocative, I hope so. On the other hand, I think that this talk would have been very provocative 5 years ago. And today you're going to hear things that you would hear in a lot of other spaces and are probably already working towards yourself, because pay transparency is one of the critical conversations and initiatives, thinking both in terms of your talent and in terms of your equity goals. So what we're going to try to do today is we're going to first start with the state of play. What are the trends? What's happening in the culture and media in terms of all these new emerging legal requirements? And then we're going to talk about the benefits of more transparency. It really can be a useful and effective tool in advancing recruitment and hiring, retention, morale and engagement, building trust, and also making sure that you are keeping all of your equity goals and your EO commitments on track. There is a risk management uh, element of this because opening things up is not a risk-free proposition. But there are key ways, tools, best practices, and tactics to manage that risk. And also you can think of transparency itself as one of your best risk management tools. We'll talk about that. And then finally, we're going to do some work right now today in terms of your strategy. So what are you already doing? What have you already implemented in transparency? And then what's your next best step in light of that? And what are some strategies and some approaches that can help you do this in the most effective way? So let's dive in, right? Let's talk about pay because everyone else in your organization is already talking about it, already sharing it. Transparency is already here. It's just how you manage it. And let's start with some definitions. Let's make sure we all know what we're talking about. So the first thing on this list is pay secrecy, because that's where pay transparency initiatives and the movement towards pay transparency came from. It came out of a longstanding culture of pay secrecy. Now, when I started at work and until not that long ago, it was pretty common practice for companies to say, yeah, please don't share. You're not allowed to share anything about your own salary. Oh, we're giving you this really nice raise. Please don't tell anybody. It would be bad for morale. We're in a really different world now. So pay secrecy is problematic. It's also, in many cases now, illegal. So the first level of pay transparency is no more secrecy, right? But pay transparency itself is not a single thing. It's a continuum of policies and practices. And that bare minimum is no secrecy. You're allowed to share, you're allowed to talk, you're allowed to ask, at least about your own personal salary. The very other end of that continuum, we're talking about fully publishing everyone's individual salary. This is pretty rare, but it is out there. And in between are a whole bunch of really effective, really useful practices that we help folks implement. Sorry about the little Zoom glitch there. And so we're going to go through all of those different options and what they look like. I put salary history on this list. It's not technically the same as pay transparency, but it's linked because a lot of the new laws and initiatives also ban the use of an individual's past salary for making a salary offer, right? And so you're no longer in a lot of places allowed to ask that question in your applications. Folks are moving away from it anyway. You might be asking about salary expectations, but the thing is, better transparency lets you skip that entire piece. You don't have to ask people what salary they're looking for because you're telling them what you're offering, and they can decide if that is right for them or not. And then finally, salary compression. Salary compression is important because pay transparency tends to reveal it. It's something that a lot of organizations struggle with. There are really important ways that you can begin to address it, and you're going to have to, because as people learn more and more about what other people make, you're going to get all kinds of tough questions that are often driven by salary compression problems, especially the tendency for long-term employees to cluster lower in the pay range because their salary growth is not advancing at the same rate as the market. You hire somebody new, and even though they might even have less experience or less skill level, they're actually getting a higher salary. So let's start with culture and the media, and pay transparency is here. It's a reality. It's an expectation for a lot of folks, particularly younger folks. And the truth is, no matter what your policy is, the internet knows all of your salaries, or at least seems to know them, because half of them might be wrong, but that data is out there. It's being estimated or promoted or published or shared by somebody, which means if you're not driving your own narrative about pay, someone else is out there doing it for you, and probably not to your favor. It's better for you to control that narrative. Just some examples, right? So Glassdoor, I go on Glassdoor and I look at data they have on projects and clients that I've worked with, and I can tell that they're estimating, they're using algorithms. There's that data may or may not be fully aligned, particularly in smaller organizations, but it's really powerful. Your employees are on there looking up salaries and trying to figure out where they fit. I'm not on TikTok. Lots of people are on TikTok. This is just one example of, folks out there driving an important conversation, right? About giving folks the tools they need to be effective negotiators of their own value in the marketplace. The good news from my standpoint is that we've gotten over the hurdle of posting pay ranges on job postings. A significant majority of employers are doing this. I imagine that a lot of you are doing it. In most cases, these surveys suggest that it's not restricted to those states where it's required. Folks have just decided this is a good thing to do anyway, and it is. And it's simpler just to post them everywhere. And in fact, it's even the case that I think Indeed now will estimate a salary range if you don't post it, if they have enough data to do so. So this is a good thing to do. Lots of folks are doing it, and it's really a really helpful practice. It is, in some cases, this really got started in response to all these new laws. The last 10 years have seen a revolution on pay transparency, and that is accelerated dramatically, especially in the last 5 years or so. And we have survey data that aligns with what I think is common sense, right? Which is that younger employees are more engaged in this conversation. They're more comfortable with it. They think it's important. They have real expectations. And anecdotally, meaning, conversations I have with folks in the workplace, both employees and hiring managers, things you see in the various sort of news articles and reporting on this, is that getting this information out there is a net positive. It makes the hiring process more pleasant. It makes it easier to get a match, right, between what someone's looking for and what you want to offer. It takes awkwardness about salary conversations. It decreases that awkwardness. But it's not a risk-free proposition, right? Because if you are doing this, and you should be doing it, you are also potentially revealing to your current employees that they might not be where they think they are in terms of salary for their jobs. So what are the rules? They're actually not that complicated. There's lots of details, lots of wrinkles, lots of exceptions. But the basic rule is that most employees are legally allowed to share and inquire about pay. And you might as well just treat everybody as if they are. Now, this covers your own salary, right? This doesn't cover sharing information if you are work in HR and have access to sort of people's sort of personal and private information. But any employee is the owner of their own information in most cases. In 10 states, there's additional requirements, posting pay ranges, salary history bands. We're going to go into that in more detail in just a minute. So here is the summary of what's out there. So first and foremost, the National Labor Relations Act has been interpreted to say that sharing salary information is protected collective action. Now that's important because It means that's not just in a unionized workplace. It's protected activity for anyone covered by the NLRA. Not everyone is. More senior positions and other positions are not covered by that law. But if you're at a large company, you're probably covered by another federal law. So if you are a federal contractor, Executive Order 11246 now protects employees of federal contractors who want to ask about, discuss, and disclose pay. Now, not following these rules can really get you into trouble, right? You can potentially have to potentially have liability for retaliation and for various kinds of penalties. In states, there's 10 states listed here that have sort of a series of requirements that are more affirmative in terms of disclosure, and even more states have state laws that ban pay secrecy and say employees are allowed to share. So if you think about the Venn diagram of not covered by the NLRA, not a federal contractor, not in all of these states that ban it under state law, the number of employees that aren't covered by some kind of legal right to share pay is pretty small. In addition, right, you have localities. Localities have their own, some of them have their own ordinances related to pay transparency. You have pay data reporting to the EEOC and now in California. And if you are a federal contractor, you're potentially about to be subject to a rule about posting pay ranges on job postings, which most of you are already doing that, so it shouldn't be that big of a lift. And more states are doing more expansion of all of this all the time. So this is a currently very evolving situation that is moving more and more in the direction of more transparency and more protection for employees that really want to know how they're doing compared to everybody else. Here's just a few examples of what some of these state laws cover. And disclaimer, of course, this is not formal legal advice. There's lots of exceptions, limitations. Make sure you get that formal legal advice that you need, but know that the parameters right here are very pro-transparency. So can't forbid people from asking about pay or sharing salaries. And this includes, by the way, making sure that your managers aren't doing this because they think that they should. Tell somebody, I'm giving you an extra bonus this year. Don't tell anybody. Make sure that's in your handbook, that you're training folks, and that you're not violating any of these disclosure rules. Requirements to post pay ranges, requiring employers to share pay ranges with current employees, forbidding use of salary history. Colorado now requires promotions to be internally posted. And so, so that's a lot of change and evolution in a pretty short period of time. But this is, in my view, all to the good. This is all ultimately to benefit you, your employees, your organizations, your companies, your business, because transparency is really good for your talent goals and your equity goals. First and foremost, it helps align recruitment with your budget, right? So the applicants are already going to know if the pay meets their requirements. Now, it used to be the case that there's always a big risk of mismatch, right? And so you would say, what's your salary expectations? And someone's going to say, they're really high, right? Because they're trying to promote themselves and get an edge in negotiation. And so you might screen them out and never interview them because you think that they're looking for a salary you can't afford to pay. The truth is that may not be true. They may be perfectly happy to come work for you at the salary that you do want to pay, but nobody knows, right? We're lost in misinformation and mismatches and a lot of wasted time. And so putting the numbers out front first is really good to get the matches that you're looking for. And got some SHRM data about this really strongly increasing the likelihood to apply. And possibly, I'm not going to say too much about this because I'm not sure how reliable what we have is, but it may be an improvement in applicant quality. And it also helps what economists call, the friction that exists in the labor market of people not really being at the exact right match for them because they don't have all the information. So there may be somebody great for you at another company that can see what you're offering and see the salary that you're offering and know that that's actually a better fit for them, and they're going to be incentivized to move to you. And ultimately, when that fully shakes out, you get to the best sort of alignment, right, of talent and openings and opportunities just by sharing a little bit more information, right? Also good for retention. So I'm not sure how many of you will resonate with this little graphic I got from a pay scale white paper, but it resonated for me, having talked to a lot of employees about how they feel about their salaries. So the first line on that graph on the right side is for employees who are actually paid right at market for their jobs. The lower graphic is employees who are paid above market. Everybody thinks they're underpaid, right? So 40% of employees paid above market think they're paid below, and most of the rest think they're only at market. Employees paid at market, almost 60% think they're paid below, right? And that makes people feel terrible. It makes them consider moving elsewhere. You don't want to disconnect between how people think they're being paid and how they're actually being paid. And sharing more information is really helpful for that. And, there's a little bit of survey data here that, transparency reduces intent to quit. But again, I think we're at a common sense way to think about what's happening inside your companies and organizations, that you don't want this mismatch. You also want to leverage transparency to encourage engagement, encourage retention, to make visible how your current employees can experience salary and career growth. What are the opportunities, right? What do they look like? How do you get an increase in pay? How do you get a promotion? That's the sort of thing where when people understand that and can organize their work and careers in that way, they're going to want to stick around. So transparency is a positive tool for engagement and retention. And finally, and importantly, it's really relevant to your equity goals, right? So we have emerging research papers and some data that really suggests that if you look at the industries where transparency is more of a standard practice, so this is typically government and academia, then it looks like more transparency can reduce the wage gap. And there's a good reason to think that's true, right? Because organizational sociologists would think about this in terms of accountability. So getting this information out there, making decisions more visible, creates more accountability for doing them well and doing them fairly. And that's always good for debiasing, right? We also can think about this in terms of individuals, right? You're putting more power into the hands of folks who have been historically underpaid, who historically have had less power in the labor market. So that's women, that's people of color, that's Black employees, that's employees with disabilities, folks who can really benefit from having access to information and the ability to know what a fair deal is and to seek it out. But you're probably wondering, right? Well, what about all the things I can imagine happening if we start sharing this information with everybody in our organization, right? That is a good thing to think about, and we're going to talk about it here in a minute, both in terms of what some of the pitfalls are, how to get ahead of them, and how to use this to your advantage. But the truth is, there's pros and cons of almost anything you want to do related to how you pay people. And you've got to make the choice that is right for your organization, is right for your values, is right for your business and your objectives. But I'm really here to persuade you that in almost every case, the risk that you're going to have to run is worth it, and you're already running it anyway, so you might as well get the benefit of it. So let's dive in. Let's start with these job postings and putting their pay ranges out there. So it is really great that this has become a standard practice. I remember even a few years ago, you would still see job postings that would say, we do not want anyone from Colorado to apply to this job, because they were trying to carve themselves out of particular state requirements. We are now in a more reasonable place where we're just moving forward with this. However, you have to be thoughtful. In particular, make sure you're actually being accurate about those pay ranges, right? So we have seen situations where folks lowballed the pay range, right? And hired people who thought they got an amazing deal, right? They got paid about the most they could possibly get paid for this job. They show up at work and discover they're actually below the median, right? This is a very, very bad situation. You are eroding trust right from the get-go, and it's ultimately going to hurt you. On the flip side, don't artificially inflate them to provide yourself with space to somehow give a particular person a giant bucket of money if you wish. That's a bad practice anyway. But try to be honest. A lot of these state laws require good faith pay ranges, and there's nuances, right? So, we worked with someone who was putting out a pretty senior role, and they were certain that they were never going to hire anybody who had sort of the minimal level of qualifications. They were also pretty certain they were never going to offer this person the top or near the top of the range, because it would wreck their equity with other folks who are in similar positions already in the organization. So they posted a hiring range, right, that was a little bit of a Goldilocks, right, around the middle, because that was really what they were reasonably thinking that they would offer for this job. However, it still means that you might have an ultimate conversation with somebody about what the full range is for that position. And it's pretty helpful to signal on your postings that this is the range we expect to offer for this position at this time, or some other way to sort of be as honest as you can about what you're putting out there. The second thing you should think about is being more explicit about the criteria for what's going to go into an offer, right? So salary commensurate on experience is kind of a useless statement, right? Nobody knows what that means. Try to be a little bit more specific. And we're going to talk a little bit later about doing the foundational work here, really laying out your pay philosophy in a way that makes it easier to be transparent, right? But, if individuals with less experience or close to the minimum are going to get offers lower in the range, then, be clear about that. Think about making sure your hiring managers are armed for these conversations, right? Nobody likes having the conversation that the job goes all the way up to a very high number, but we're offering you this lower number, and here's why. But those are real conversations we have to be prepared to have with folks. And to tell them, and if you come here, here's how you have the opportunity to grow and progress, even in this same job, even if you don't actually get promoted or move up. Have that guidance, have those communication tools. Think about how to do a better job of monitoring how these offers are going. Sometimes you only have to have another person look at it if it's above the median or above a certain salary level, but it's always good to have more than one set of eyes on these decisions. It's how you make them more consistent and less biased. Finally, so we're we're into the more radical part of this presentation, but I'm going to say we recommend not negotiating salary. Um, it is hard to advance your transparency goals if you permit negotiation because you end up with too much variation for not enough good reasons. Not enough reasons you can explain other than this person was really persuasive or this manager was, more willing to negotiate. Those aren't very good answers, right? And so we know that negotiation has equity issues, right? We have plenty of research that women and people of color are less likely to negotiate, and that even when they do, they might be penalized, right, for really trying to go after their worth. It's hard to keep it consistent, and the bigger problem is that, offering a special person a big bucket of money for reasons, right, then creates instant equity issues for you with everybody who's already at the organization. You have to have a process. Even if you think this is new market information, like you're learning that your salaries are too low and you had to offer this person more money, great. Every single person who's working for you now is in the labor market. They could leave tomorrow to go somewhere else to get that salary. So if you do have negotiation, have guardrails, have reviews, and have a framework for making sure that you're making equity adjustments in light of new offers that you're making. Finally, be really careful about communicating that to anyone that you're hiring that they somehow got something better than everybody else. It's really tempting, right? You're trying to close the deal. You want to make them feel that they're really special and they did such a good job advocating for themselves. But in most cases, it's not really that true. And it just, again, breeds some mistrust and disillusionment when they get there and they find out what everyone else is making, which is about the same as what they're making, right? Now, this is the tougher issue, right? This is the one that folks are worried about, and they're right to be worried about it. If we tell everybody what everybody else is making, it won't make any sense. There'll be lots of inequities revealed. Or even, and we've been through this, we can't tell anybody anything. We don't have a real clear policy for how we set salaries. For some smaller organizations, you might not even really have defined pay ranges, right? You haven't done all the legwork. And you're just going to have to do it. And you're going to have to do it because regardless of how much you want to open the books, they're already open, right? Folks are already sharing this information and you're going to have to confront it, and you might as well get ahead of it and be proactive. This includes being really explicit about how you're going to address salary compression. We're going to show you some things you can do in just a minute, and pay disparities. It includes being proactive, as we talked about before, and how this can be a good way for you to show opportunities for growth and development. Sorry. You really have to end favoritism and reduce subjectivity. This is your biggest problem, right? I like to say I find underpaid white guys all the time, and that's because there's so much arbitrariness in how salaries get set, and folks are paid below what they should be paid, just because different people are using different decision criteria and weighing things differently, and you're creating all of this inequity, not meaning to, right? Everybody's operating in good faith here, but it's a problem if you allow a lot of individual subjective decisions, if you have this model, which is probably what this is what most compensation consultants advise, right? Is we're going to give you a range. We're going to run a market data. We're going to give you a pay range, and good luck to you, because we assume you want the maximum flexibility in terms of how you're going to pay any particular person within that range. Ultimately, that's not serving you. It's really better to have policies and structures that ensure consistency, that promotes equity, that makes transparency go down a lot better. It also just, again, we're kind of into the kinds of little stressors that you don't need, how much people worry about how to make these decisions, how much employees worry about whether things are fair or not. You just want people to focus on their work, right? And so you can really take some of that both stress, delay, complexity out of the process. Some things we recommend, right? Like a written locality pay policy if you have people in different parts of the country. Having a defined job architecture, which we'll talk about in a minute. Setting clear benchmarks. Where in the range should you be at a certain experience level? That helps your salary compression, right? And then you use your regular increase cycle to spot those problems and to fix them. And then we just think that merit increases are largely terrible. These are the sort of small, do you get 2.5% or 3.25% based on this annual 1 to 5 scoring. There's lots better ways to leverage performance and to reward it and recognize it. And this is where favoritism and subjectivity is a problem in most organizations that's going to be revealed by more transparency, and it's very, very hard to explain. It's probably not doing the work for you that you want it to do, and there's better ways to do it. So don't be scared. There are ways to do all of this that are all achievable. And again, some of you are probably down this road already, right? Some of these things are already starting to fall out of favor because they're not as effective. So let's talk about managing your risk around equity. So first basic thing, I'm sure a lot of you are already doing this. I hope you're all already doing this, right? Having an annual review for race and gender equity. However, you might not be getting as much leverage out of that as you could, right? So are you reviewing across jobs and levels and not just within little bitty individual small groups of job titles, right? You can't fully understand the state of equity without other metrics that look at representation and flow, that look at sort of placement issues and lots of other things that you're not going to get out of just comparing person to person. It also makes it very hard to see patterns, and patterns are really important because that's where the solutions are, right? Whatever you find, fix it quickly. And don't just fix it, understand it. Why did this gap arise? What is this telling us about weak points in our policies and practices? Don't just use a compliance standard. Think about this as your own due diligence. You are looking for risk proactively so you can interrupt it. Anything that doesn't make sense to your employees in terms of a pay gap can hurt you, is a risk. It's a gap between how your employees' unexplained pay differences that don't seem to line up with how folks think it's supposed to work in terms of your policies and practices. Those gaps really create space between what's happening in your workplace and what you're saying, what your values are, what commitments you've made to the workforce or externally. And those gaps, that's where your real risk is. That's where you can really run into trouble. It doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be the case that this is something that someone could absolutely definitively sue you for and win. If that's the only thing that you're looking for, you're not looking hard enough because you're also missing these opportunities to use closing these gaps and reforming these practices to your advantage. So this point, you're probably saying that all sounds great, Pam, but that's not something that we can do. There is something that you can do here based on what you're already doing and what your best next step is, right? And thinking about it both in terms of the opportunities and the risks and how you're going to maximize one and minimize the other. And like I said, some of you are already doing a lot of this. This is emerging best practice in a lot of places now, and that is pretty exciting. So here's a list. Here's a list of different things that you could be doing if you're not already. The minimum. Do you have a formal policy banning pay secrecy? If not, you should put it in your handbook. Make sure you train your managers so they are not actually chilling people's rights because they don't know that the world has changed and you can no longer tell somebody, yeah, please don't share that information. Applicant transparency. We're mostly here, but make sure that you're doing those bona fide good faith pay ranges, that you have a good infrastructure to make sure that this works for you positively when you're extending offers. Range transparency, this is more of a developing area, right? So the existing state laws are somewhat limited. They might require you to make it available upon request or in certain situations. But you should really consider how you can make your high-level salary structure visible, right? Not every salary for every job necessarily, but you probably have levels or ranges or roles or sort of buckets of jobs where it makes sense to just be really clear about this is the range for that job. That helps people plan their careers and look at advancement. It helps folks understand salary growth. It helps managers be more attuned to the fact that there's a whole range for a job and we shouldn't be clustering everybody in one little bit of it. And the critical thing here, though, you can't put those ranges out there without explaining what puts somebody lower in the range, in the middle, or higher in the range, and then following it, right? So you need that process transparency. That is, to us, one of the most essential tools. You may have a written pay philosophy, and it may be that you can improve it, right? Is it somewhat generic or aspirational, right? We strive to pay everyone, at a certain level of the market to make sure that pay reflects, performance objectives. It's not anything that is the guidance that you could operationalize, right? A good pay philosophy has very clear guidance. It's specific. There's accountability to make sure that folks are actually following it. So I've looked at plenty of organizations that have a really beautiful pay philosophy of vague generalities, and it doesn't match up with when you interview the hiring managers, they have no idea that it even exists or that they should follow it. When you look at the data, folks are not distributed based on that. And so you want something that's actually going to work for you, right? Consider including promotion philosophy too, right? Now, the easiest thing of all, in our opinion, is to automate some of these processes. This takes favoritism and subjectivity out of it. It massively reduces the amount of time folks have to spend making all these decisions. And it makes it possible to make adjustments really quickly and easily, right? So this is matrix pay, right, where you have rows of different roles and columns that represent different levels in the range. Sometimes it's a formal step system like the federal GS system. It includes firms that use actual salary calculators. You put in the role, the location, 4 or 5 other things, and it just generates the number. And that's it. No negotiation, you're done. Everybody understands how it works. Pros and cons, right? This definitely has downsides, but has a lot of upsides. Promotion transparency. This has been an issue since I started my civil rights practice, a couple of decades ago. And folks were not posting internal promotions. And then it became very difficult for women, for Black employees to get promoted because they didn't know about the secret promotion system that existed. We're still not far enough along on getting promotion transparency, and it means you're missing out. You're missing out on folks who could be competing for and advancing into your leadership because they don't know how to get in. And then, of course, at the end of the range is individual transparency. We don't view this as a general prescription. for the for every organization. There are organizations where it makes sense, or certain jobs or certain levels. But it is important to know that that gives you full accountability for everything. But we do recommend that if you're going that direction, that you get really good buy-in from the folks in your workforce. So you may be wondering, what is a pay philosophy like the one that I'm talking about? So it should include all of these things, right? It should include how you get to a pay range for a job, and then it should include how you get to a dollar figure for a person in that range. What are the factors? How do you measure them? How do you apply them? It should be structured so that different managers will come to similar conclusions about similar people. It should spell out how increases work. How do you get salary growth? Who makes all these decisions? Is there any review? How is this transparent to employees and to applicants? And what are the values that drive all of these choices? Because that's really fundamentally where this conversation should start, right? What are the values that you're trying to advance here? Here's another thing that we recommend that goes hand in hand with good transparency. A defined job architecture. This is the hottest topic, I think, in HR right now. I keep getting, pitches and things about it. We think these tools are really effective, but it requires you to go in and make sure that your structure is aligned. And you have to keep doing it, right? So you may have done this. You may have done this several times, but if the last time was 4 or 5 years ago, you've probably got role creep, right? You've probably got different teams that have created new jobs that are straining the bounds of the structure that you want to have. It may be that some of the roles and jobs that you have are no longer that important, or they look different now. What your needs are different. So this should be a process that you regularly engage in, and it should be competency based, right? It should differentiate jobs based on level of skill and scope of responsibility. That's the touchstone for pay equity, right? So you really want to make sure that that is how you're thinking about these different roles and jobs. And ideally, you also have a developmental mindset, right? So we have roles, we have levels, and we have ways that folks can get up the ladder, at least to a certain point, and those are transparent, right? And we support people so that they can make those moves. If you're going in any kind of matrix pay direction, you have to do this. But even if you're not, it really helps rationalize your pay decisions, your hiring decisions, and creating these developmental paths. You can think about building this kind of matrix and potentially having more formal experience-based placement. I'm going to show you an example in a minute. But the federal GS system is very structured. Also, by the way, on locality pay, right? It's a really simple. They have everything laid out on all the adjustments that they make, and it's really easy to know how your salary is going to grow if you stay with the government, and you know that your treatment is consistent. So this is what a matrix could look like. This is framed on related experience. Related experience is a great proxy in most cases, not every case, but in most cases for proficiency. And we all know this by common sense, because we all think if we're hiring somebody who's been doing it for 2 years and we're hiring somebody who's been doing it for 10 years, that the 10-year person is more advanced and should get a higher salary. So think about at least benchmarking this. This helps with salary compression because make sure that people are progressing, and you have a way to look each year when you're doing adjustments to say, yeah, how are they doing? And do we need to move them up faster so that we don't get so much compression? You can think about other factors you might put on a matrix like this. Maybe it's responsibility for, larger teams for particular technical expertise, but, can you spell it out? Can you say what should drive someone being low in the range, near the median, higher in the range, and then apply it? And then there's performance factors, right? So this is, I think, the question most people have. Well, what about performance? How can we make sure that we aren't rewarding people who aren't performing? That is a very important question. And typically salary is a very weak tool for this, right? We talked about merit increases. I could do a whole webinar on the problems with merit increases. They're subjective. The measures are usually pretty limited. If you wanted to do this right, the way the industrial psychologists tell us, you would have to do job-related measures for different jobs. It's expensive, it's complicated. And you know, most folks have a one stem, one term for the whole organization, sort of bureaucracy that for you. And there's alternatives, and these are the more popular ways to form things like bonus programs, things like team and organizational KPIs and things like ongoing regular one feedback and development with your managers. Performance to advancement and growth and promotion. But it's really more straightforward. It's about skill level and scope of responsibility. It's your choice, right? It's your organization, but it's your company. But whatever you want to do, it helps to be very explicit. Does the review process factor into increases? That's a tell when the timing lineup can see, right, in terms of their own experiences that they're not seeing the off. So be really attentive talking about, thinking about, and measuring performance. And then there's, market factors are really important. And the only thing I want to say about this is don't forget about your internal equity. It's easy to just sort of pull these numbers, this is current pay, and think about them in terms of hiring. But really, it should feed into how you think about jobs overall. And, trying to make exceptions and think very hard about the compa ratio metric for equity. The compa ratio is the most common thing that compensation consultants use. Whether your salary are all between 10 and 120% market median. That's a really blunt stick that doesn't tell you equity problems or disparities. It doesn't tell you anything about salary compression. We like to use range progress. So how far are you moving the range and making sure folks are. We are just about finished here. I want to ask a question that we're free to drop it in the Q&A. Sort of last things are, and bringing them. They have ideas, goals, and needs, and help you figure out which options are priority. And all of this is a trust is hard to undermine. And so if you're thinking about
My apologies, everyone. It looks like we're having technical difficulties. Please give us one moment. Stand by. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and for attending. We apologize for the technical difficulties. But as we mentioned at the top of the hour, we will definitely send out the presentation to our member company partners, and everyone will also have access to the training. So again, we thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you all next month on June 27th, where our very own Pam McAvain will be presenting. So thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Take care. Bye-bye.